Good evening, everybody. Welcome, and thank you for joining with us on this beautiful evening. On behalf of the Jesuits of Canada and Jose Sanchez, the Director of Communications, and myself, we welcome you to our presentation tonight. And as usual, we'll start by acknowledging the land on which we are presenting from. We wish to acknowledge the land on which the Jesuit Sacred Heart House operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this sacred land. We are live streaming in 2 languages, and I'm going to turn it over to Jose to give you information about how that works.
Thank you, Pat. Welcome, everyone. And for this bit, I'm going to switch to French so that our francophone spectators can listen in as well. So, pour choisir la langue de votre préférence, si vous êtes sur un ordinateur, dans les commandes de votre réunion webinaire, cliquez sur l'interprétation, le bouton Interprétation, et cliquez après sur la langue que vous souhaitez entendre. Si vous êtes sur un appareil mobile, dans les contrôles de votre réunion, appuyez sur les boutons avec les 3 petites pointes, ou plus, selon l'appareil que vous utilisez, et appuyez après sur Interprétation de la langue, et après, appuyez sur la langue que vous souhaitez entendre. C'est important de se souvenir que l'interprétation linguistique n'est pas disponible lorsque vous accédez à Zoom sur un navigateur web. Thank you, Pat. Over to you.
If any of you have questions for our speakers, please put them in the question and answer box. And when the presentation is over, we'll get to as many questions as possible, and we'll try and group them together if there are similar questions with the same thought. So, it's my pleasure to introduce our 2 presenters tonight. Father Greg Kennedy is a member of the Society of Jesus. His doctoral studies in philosophy at the University of Toronto planted in him an aspiration to be an organic farmer. And just as an aside, I'd like to know how philosophy could plant an aspiration to be an organic farmer. The book Reupholstered Psalms is his first published book of poetry. It was followed by Amazing Friendships Between Animals and Saints. And he will have 2 further volumes of poetry published by Novalis Press later this year. Greg is currently assigned to the Ignatian Jesuit Center in Guelph, Ontario, where he works as a spiritual director and part-time farmer. Nan Goodship is coming to us from Vancouver Island, where she works as a professional artist, a retreat leader, and as a spiritual director. Nan has a master's degree in fine arts and has studied spiritual direction in numerous places around the globe. Her 2 loves are the life of the spirit and creativity. We're very grateful to have Greg and Nan with us this evening, and we look forward to your presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Pat. And thank you one and all for joining us tonight. I'd like to begin with a question. What made Christmas Eve special in your childhood home? And if you didn't celebrate Christmas Eve, what other, perhaps you could think of another holiday that you celebrated? What made it special for you? Well, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, in his Little Prince, answers it this way. When I was a little boy, the lights of the Christmas tree, the music of the midnight mass, the tenderness of smiling faces used to make up the radiance of the gifts I received. In my household, we celebrated Christmas Eve. What made it special was my father's theatrical rendition of a night before Christmas, when all through the house, not a creature was stirring, not even a, yes, you know how it goes. So I've always connected stories in my mind with celebration and also with education. After some time, even as a child, I loved to read Aesop's fables, and then I started to read and learn from Jesus's parables, and then a little later on from the Zen stories, from the Zen Roshis. So stories have an ability to kind of cut through and get to the heart and kind of undercut, you could say, our preconceptions, our prejudices, and really touch our hearts and find kind of possibility of change in there. And so that's why at preschool, they always say in a sermon, include a story, because at the end of the day, that's the only thing that the people are going to remember. So what's good for a sermon, I figure, is good for a webinar. So Nan and I are going to read you a little bedtime story. And it's to celebrate Earth Day Eve. And hopefully, it'll educate our hearts a little bit too. So the story is called Scary Sky, or Deus Ex Machina. Now, Scary Sky, you'll start to realize why it'll become obvious why it's called Scary Sky. But let me explain a little bit before we start why this Deus Ex Machina. What does that mean? Well, that's Latin for literally God from the machine. And so this was a device, quite literally a crane, that ancient Greek playwrights would use to get themselves out of a plot pickle, you could say. So when the storyline got so complicated that nothing seemed to be able to get them out of the troubles that they were in at the end of the tragedy, the playwright would have to resort to the machina, this crane that would lower down a god, and the god would snap his or her divine fingers, and all the problems would be solved. Now, these kind of endings, these Deus Ex Machina endings, are pretty usually far-fetched, implausible, and not all that satisfactory for the audience because it's just out of nowhere. Now that may happen with our story too. But I believe, and very deeply actually, that unless we have the divine with us, this current ecological play we're in is going to end very, very tragically. And not only tragically, but very ugly as well. And so how do we welcome in the divine to help us out of this mess, you could say? So this is very intentionally a Deus Ex Machina story. So I'd say make yourself as comfortable as you can. Sit back, relax, maybe snuggle up to someone in your bubble. Let's hear a story. No one remembers who invented rainbow spray. Was it a scientist in Japan or China or the USA? Did it pop into a head covered with gray hairs or into a mind fresh out of school? Whoever it was, wherever it was, some smarty shirt looked out the window one rainy, sunny day and spied a rainbow. What if we could make those colors stick, came the thought. Life would be so much better with endless rainbows.
So, Dr. Brighty, we'll call the inventor that for now, because obviously this forgotten so-and-so had a light bulb for a brain. He got to work dissecting the strips of colors. After lots of tests and time and hard thinking, Brighty broke down the biggest sky-wide rainbow into its tiniest parts. Under a monster microscope, Dr. Brighty managed to glue a crayon particle to the misty center of the arc-en-ciel. That's French, you know, for rainbow. If any of you, when younger, ever drew a nice crayon drawing on a big white wall, you'll know that your masterpiece hung around a lot longer than your average rainbow. Our good scientists sold the discovery for buckets of money, but soon fell into the deep, dark well of history, never to be seen or heard of again.
Meanwhile, however, the invention was a smash. Everybody wanted rainbow spray. At first, it all looked so beautiful. Presidents and prime ministers paid their country's greatest artists to paint the sky above their top government buildings. Mayors hired artists to replace the city smog with dazzling landscapes of mountains and lakes. The sky became a canvas for the best talent in the world. For a while, there was much more to see than boring, dull old colors when you looked up. There were huge floating bowls of luscious fruits, giant, gorgeous flowers, happy, pretty faces, and slick, splashy sailboats.
All these pictures stuck perfectly to the sky, rain or shine. But beauty wasn't the only thing to stick. Since nearly everybody could afford to buy at least one can of original rainbow spray, the new deluxe versions, such as Rainbow Spray Sparkles, were more expensive. The great heavenly murals began to be covered over. People who, frankly, couldn't even paint their toenails pretty, all wanted to see their names in big across the sky. So the horizon began filling up with Susie, Pedro, Lee, and Bob. Soon enough, stickmen, tic-tac-toe games, silly squiggles, rude words, and dumb doodles started blotting out the sun.
Darker and more mishmash overcast, the planet was growing every single day. Authorities had to act. World leaders convened and signed conventions to limit the amount of rainbow spray that went up into the atmosphere. A few brave countries banned the stuff outright. Others made laws that permitted only indoor use. So inside the comfort of your own home, you could fill the space all you wanted with green cats and yellow smiley faces. But outside air was reserved for official use only. During elections, the moon and all the stars disappeared behind the promising grins of hopeful politicians.
But such measures did precious little. People just loved rainbow spray. They slipped into their backyards when their neighbors were away and scrawled out above their roofs, "Happy birthday, Frank," or "Marry me, Angie," or "SC plus LP." Proud of their stomachs, they often sketched in the air a picture of their full dinner plates. In parks, people left blotches of color wherever they walked their dogs.
Things were getting scary. In some places, you could barely see your own hand in front of your face. So thick was the atmosphere with rainbow spray. Just when it looked like humanity would choke on colors, some other brighty, in this case, Professor Cleansqueak, invented Spray Away. Finally, a product that could scrub pure the sky. Just shoot out the foam, wait 38 seconds, and wipe. Voila. Nothing but natural, clear, blue space once again.
Another modern scientific miracle. Elementary schools became big buyers, and on special days, the kids would put on squeaky yellow rubber gloves and floppy purple rubber boots and march out with their teachers to tidy up the low-hanging sky around the playground. Of course, their short arms could reach only so high. So the adults would say with sweet teacherly voices, "Great job, children. See how much you can already do today. And when you grow up big and tall, all the sky will be yours to wash. You alone are the world's only hope for open, empty horizons. Some kids would swell with pride when they heard this. Many others would cry inside because it sounded like a lot to expect of little people who had to ask for help just to open the window.
Soon, a sales war erupted. The company that sold rainbow spray started making commercials to convince viewers that its new green formula was positively good for the sky, that its latest line of rainbow spray scents, including lilac, lavender, lily of the valley, plus watermelon and pumpkin spice, help purify smelly, smoky city air. That empty rainbow spray canisters were now being recycled into shiny spoons sent overseas to starving children.
Meanwhile, spray away industries funded studies that showed the harmful effects on humans of continuous exposure to rainbows. They promoted support groups for parents overwhelmed by the steady flood of laundry to do, because every time their kids went outside, they came back covered head to toe with stripes. The two companies were about to go to court when their CEOs realized just how much they needed each other. The more rainbow spray there was blocking out the sun, the more cans of spray away were sold. The more spray away cans were used, the more room there was in a freshly wiped sky to apply more rainbow spray. It formed a perfect economic circle. After some very secret negotiations, the two companies merged into one giant corporation, Rainbow Spray Away Incorporated, better known as RSA Inc.
Now, all of this would have gone very, very poorly for the world and very richly for shareholders, were it not for a little girl in Sweden who said to her normally shy self, "This is just too stupid." She began a Rainbow Spray Away Friday sit. It was very simple. Instead of going to school, she would just sit down for a whole day and refuse to touch anything that had to do with artificial rainbows or their removal. Half of her friends loved playing with rainbow spray. To these, she explained how that kind of play takes the sunny fun away from other people alive and not yet born. The other half of her friends got great satisfaction from scrubbing hard with spray away. She showed these friends that really you didn't need to buy expensive chemicals to clean the sky. What the sky needed was just a little rest from all the garbage being shot up into it.
The little girl became famous. Many people liked her, but some extra cranky ones didn't. However, she wouldn't let them stop her. She knew the sky was much bigger and more important than their small, narrow minds. More and more people started joining her sits, and not just children her own age, but also adults and even grandparents too. And not just in Sweden, but all over the world. Because all over the world, the sky had become a battlefield where the war between rainbow spray and spray away was fought. Moreover, the empty cans were turning up everywhere, in ditches, in rivers, washing onto once beautiful beaches.
You can imagine how complicated the world had become. The rainbow sprayers were against the spray awayers. The spray awayers were against the rainbow sprayers. And both camps were against the new Rainbow Spray Away Fridayers. No one talked anymore. They only shouted. Everyone seemed to have forgotten that there is only one sky, one sun, and one moon to go around. With every mouth screaming, no ear could hear the sky crying, broken-hearted by so much hatred and misunderstanding below. When it rained, no one felt the drops like sad teardrops falling on their faces. Instead, They got angry because it made their hair wet and ratty.
There seemed no way out of the mess. The puddles of used rainbow spray and spray away began swelling into ponds, and ponds into lakes, and lakes into seas. Cities became flooded with gray sludge, the ugly mixture of the two products plus street dust and a rising tide of trash from all the discarded cans and super absorbent spray away single wipes. The rainbow spray away Fridayers continued making speeches, writing letters, waving placards, but couldn't stop the flood creeping up all around them, the flood of chemicals, junk, and unfriendliness.
Then it happened. What no one expected. We could say that it came right out of the blue, but really it came right out of the dirty gray. One day, another little girl, her name was Profeta, this time in Haiti, and if you don't remember where that is, don't feel bad. Little countries like Haiti are most often forgotten. This Profeta found an old piece of paper floating in a swamp of rainbow spray away slop. It caught her eye because there was a picture at the top of a big boat with clouds and a big curve over it. Plus, all the words stood out despite the yuck surrounding them. Profeta reached out, being careful not to splash the awful stuff onto her skin. Where the paper came from, she had no idea. The lucky thing is that Profeta had a mother who loved to read to her. Thanks to her mother, she also loved to read. Strange as the words on the dirty page were, Profeta found them lovely to read.
Understand that I am establishing my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, birds, livestock, and all the wildlife of the earth that are with you, all the animals of the earth that came out of the ark. I establish my covenant with you that never again will every creature be wiped out by floodwaters. There will never again be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all future generations. I have placed my bow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I form clouds over the earth and the bow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and all the living creatures. Water will never again become a flood to destroy every creature. The bow will be in the clouds, and I will look at it and remember the permanent covenant between God and all the living creatures on the earth. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and every creature on earth.
What covenant meant, Profeta could not say. Even the small word God wasn't at all easy to understand. But what came out clear to Profeta was a vision of rainbows. Suddenly she saw them as bridges between the sky and all living creatures. Bridges. This indeed was something very new. Up until she read that scrap of paper, she had always thought of rainbows like dams that kept out things like the sun. Although only few people in Haiti had enough money to buy rainbow spray, plenty of it was blown down from the north by strong Arctic winds. When it all smushed together above her neighborhood, it became like a big wall of jumbled junky colors that the clouds and even the birds couldn't get through. All her life, Profeta only knew rainbows as the things that blocked out, stopped up, and dammed in whatever else was in the sky.
Now, thanks to that mysterious bit of paper, Profeta looked up and saw bridges, long bands of colors connecting sky and herself together. And not just her, but her friends too, and the dog that slept in front of her house, and the fish she saw all crowded in the buckets in the market. Rainbows were like string tying them all together. And when she imagined God, she saw the face of her mother, who was always trying to get Profeta and her younger brother Samuel to listen to each other and not to fight.
And then Profeta saw another thing. With her eyes closed, she saw a rainbow arcing from her heart into the heart of Samuel. This time it looked like a big, fun slide. She saw herself climb up the steep curve coming out of her heart and sliding down, giggling, into her brother's heart. When she got there, she noticed all kinds of pictures inside that she had never seen before. Pictures of poor Samuel scared in the dark. Pictures of him embarrassed at school. Pictures of him crying with a dead butterfly in his hands. The one he found on the road and took back to their house, but never said why. When Profeta looked at all these pictures, she wanted to hug her little brother. And that was a feeling she almost never had. But she felt close to him now, united.
Running back home, Samuel was the first person Profeta saw out front. She rushed up to him with arms toward him. Samuel shrank back, ready for another sister attack. But instead of push or shake him, Profeta squeezed him gently. Sure, Samuel would do some pretty stupid things that drove Profeta crazy. But there was a rainbow between them. And this rainbow showed some of what was going on inside. Profeta had a hard time hating her brother now that she had seen what was hidden in his heart.
Without using that big, heavy word, covenant, Profeta explained to Samuel the rainbow connection that she discovered on the paper in the puddle. She taught him how to climb up the slide from his heart and swoosh down into someone else's. You should try it, she said. It makes you feel light, like flying.
So when Samuel went to school the next day and arrived 3 minutes late and was made to sit in the corner by Miss Magdala, the teacher, instead of secretly drawing pictures of her being eaten by sharks, he drew 2 tiny hearts with a rainbow in between. Then he saw how hard Miss Magdala worked. He saw her mother, sick and old in bed. He saw how much she worried about the gangs around the school that taught kids to steal and hurt other people. Samuel didn't want to hug Miss Magdala. That would have been too weird. But he did want to listen better and try not to upset her.
And that's how it went. Profeta and Samuel started building rainbow bridges between everyone and even everything they knew. Samuel stopped teasing the dog outside and hitting it with pebbles. Profeta stopped telling stories about the girls she didn't like. How could she lie about them when they were all attached by rainbows? And even the food they ate started tasting better because when they looked at their plates, they saw thin rainbows stretching out to the fields and to the ocean.
Soon their friends were seeing striped bridges too. The whole neighborhood started listening to each other, understanding each other, helping each other. Paying money for rainbow spray made no sense now that you could slide down rainbows into any heart for free. Since sliding into someone's heart was so much fun, why would you ever want to wipe that rainbow away? In Haiti, sales of rainbow spray and spray away dried up completely. Nobody wanted the stuff. Then, as Haitians sent out rainbow bridges to other islands around them, rainbow spray away ink had to pull out of the entire Caribbean.
From islands to continents, rainbow bridges and slides were popping up everywhere. People with dark, heavy hearts began to feel sunshine inside. Some of the older folks called it hope, a warmth in their chest they remember having long ago as children. Suddenly, people woke up feeling dead tired of fighting and wanted to talk instead. Rainbow sprayers, spray-awayers, and rainbow spray-away Fridayers began listening to each other. The more they did, the less convinced they were that theirs was the one and only decent group on earth. In fact, faces began smiling at all the seriousness that had been taken for so long by so many. To slide into the heart of someone and take a look around there is to decrease the number of enemies shouting on the earth. It is to know that one sky unites all people, every living creature. That kind of beauty you can't sell in a can. But you can see it anytime, rain or shine, or especially rain and shine together, standing on the bridge of a heart-planted rainbow. The end, or, my friends, just the beginning. So let me just ask you to take a moment, if you could, and ask yourself, and if you want to write this down, great. If you don't, just in your mind, what is the moral of this story for me personally at this moment in my life? What does it mean for me this very day? And there's no right or wrong answer to this, of course. So for me this very night, what is the moral of the story I just heard? And that question leads logically to this one. How can I live this moral or this meaning? How can I live it out in my life as it is right now? What is the call? What is my call for this moral? So, and no need to write this in the chat box. Just this is for you, because we'll have volumes to read. So, and I just want to explain it briefly. I'm going to say a few words, and then Nan is going to give her perspective. I just want to say what prompted me to write this book, this little story. I wrote it about 2 or 3 months ago, before the election in the United States, when things were, I guess it was 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, maybe. Yeah, I guess that more like that, when things were ever more divisive. So there are 3 things, I'm going to tell you 3 things that prompted me to write this story. The first is a discomfort I've been feeling for quite some time now with the level of anger in the discourse in some ecological circles. I mean, for me, this scary sky is an allegory, you could say, for all kinds of things, but primarily for climate change. The second idea that prompted me, the reason that prompted me to write this was, I want to better understand the connection, or you could even say the dialectic, between activism and what I'm calling Easterism. I'll explain that in a moment. And then finally, the last thing that prompted me to write this little thing is a deep conviction I have that creativity and conversion have to play a part and are actually indispensable in resolving this ecological tragedy that we're in. And without these creativity and conversion, the tragedy, as I said, is going to end quite ugly. So let me just explain. Anger. Anger is very justifiable and understandable and necessary in circumstances. And the ecological circumstance is, should elicit our anger about what we're doing to the rest of the world and to the possibility of life and for future generations. But anger is an energy that's good for sprinting, but it's not very good at all for marathons. You need a different kind of energy to run for the long race. And so that energy, I feel, is love. And if we don't have love, we're not going to be able to endure. Love has that enduring quality. So the anger in some of these discourses of kind of the accusatory side of saying, you know, the generations before us really screwed this up, and we have to somehow blame it on them. I'm not quite sure. I mean, that might rile us up, which is we need to be roused, but to actually effect change, I think we need a different kind of energy. And in here, I feel that Ignatius of Loyola helps us a great deal. What we really need, I think, to get us out of this pickle is found in the spiritual exercises. And it's what Ignatius calls the presupposition. I'm just going to read this to you. It's so beautiful. He says, everyone ought to be more eager to put a good interpretation on a neighbor's statement than to condemn it. Further, if one cannot interpret it favorably, one should ask how the other means it. If that meaning is wrong, one should correct the person with love. And if this is not enough, one should search out every appropriate means through which, by understanding the statement in a good way, it may be saved. So rather being quick to condemn someone, we try to get into their shoes. We try to slide into their heart, in a sense, and understand where they're coming from. Now, that's not to say that we accept what they're doing, and often things that we do or others do is very wrong, and we have to work against it. But unless we have this charity that would say, I'm going to try to meet you where you're at, and let's try to work together, we'll just be screaming at each other. And I don't feel that that's going to get us any place. And again, this kind of divisiveness that we're seeing in politics and even in ecological movements can sometimes reduce us to that, screaming at each other. So that was the first motive. The second motive is my confusion, I could say, about this dialogue or dialectic between activism and Easterism. And we all know what activism is. It's doing things for a cause. Easterism, we've just celebrated Easter in the Christian church, is this conviction that God, despite all appearances, is going to redeem this somehow. And that the disaster that we're experiencing right now is not the end of the story. And so Jesus' death was not the end of the story. His resurrection is the continuation of that story. So activism without Easterism will lead to burnout and despair and messianic complexes, or all of the above. So obviously we need to do things, but Easterism without activism can quickly become just kind of sitting on our hands and just allowing, just praying without doing anything, without works, as St. Paul would say. So I believe that I am still looking for the magical measurement, how to get these two right. And maybe I might err too much on Easterism sometimes. So I'm trying to find the perfect balance between these two. So sometimes my cake is a little too wet. Sometimes it's a little too dry. I want it to rise, I want it to let rise perfectly, but I'm still working on that. So this story is my attempt to understand that dialectic, that connection. And finally, creativity and ecological conversion. I really believe that when we call God creator, we actually mean something more than that. We're actually talking about God as creativity. And that if we're made in the image and likeness of God, when we're creative, we're participating in the divine. So telling stories, doing art, singing, dancing, science, gardening, all these things by which we're creative allows us to participate, allows us to become holy in a sense. And until we believe that that's kind of our call, to become mystics, to become co-creators in a sense, we're never really going to get to the bottom of this crisis. It's going to be kind of either for economic gain or for fear that we do things, not out of love. So we need these kind of celebrations, we need these rituals, and to tell stories, because it helps us understand ourselves and helps us understand our world. And out of that, hopefully, we'll be converted. Because again, conversion, there's an energy in conversion that allows people to sacrifice themselves. And in fact, this is what the United Nations is calling us for, a wholesale change of our complete society and the way we operate. So without a kind of ecological conversion, that's going to be very, very difficult, and we'll whine about the consequences or about the sacrifices. But whereas when we're converted, the sacrifices we willingly accept and perhaps even joyfully accept. Now, but there is, to finish, there's a fine line between creativity and kitsch. So creativity always requires a bit of restraint. I mean, if Nan is a professional artist, and you'll see a few of her watercolors a little later, if she just kept on painting and painting and painting, it would start to look quite ugly. So she has to know when to stop. Same with the musician. They have to know when there's too many notes. One can of rainbow spray might be very beautiful, but a billion cans of rainbow spray, you got a big mess. Same too with, one electric car is a scientific triumph. 3 billion electric cars is a tragedy. So where do we know restraint? How do we allow our creativity not to get out of hand, as it were? So that's what maybe I'll just pass it on to Nan, because here's a very creative person and a lovely person to boot. So Nan, how about you take over from now?
Thank you, Greg. I appreciated what you said. And I've been enjoying working with this parable a lot. I've been thinking of it as, or describing it to friends as, an ecological parable. And so there's a number of things that came to be as I was illustrating, and more, in fact. So one of the images or the metaphor of the story having to do with really our delight at new invention when the rainbow spray was invented. And why not? Rainbows are fabulous. But then the commodification of the natural world, taking something that is natural, that we received as free gift, and then turning it into something that we spend money for. So I look at, in a big way, in a general way, the commodification of the natural world. And so I think of examples of that as any time we look at trees and we see them either as lumber or as an ecosystem, a biosystem that works together. If you see it as lumber, then that's a commodification way of seeing it. The other, water, for example, when you see it as something that nourishes everything around us, that flows in us and through us, that's one thing. If you see it as something that is a resource that can either be bottled or can be used to clean toxic waste, or there's so many ways in which we use water or exploit water. So the difference between exploitation, commodification, and appreciating it for how it has worked for millions, billions of years, and the actual sacred gift of water itself. And then I was thinking about air. well, what's the commodification of air? Well, when it's part of the commons and we can put junk into it ad nauseum until it's too much, it becomes something that we start, in a sense, paying for. So how do we think about the air? And in fact, anything natural in the world. It's really, that's one of the things that came forward from your parable that I really appreciated. So another thing I was thinking about was the beautiful way that it kind of went sideways when Prophetic came into the picture. That all of a sudden she came upon rainbows and this story of rainbows as something completely new, something she hadn't imagined before. And suddenly her vision was completely changed. So what is it in our life, those things that allow us to change the way we see, to change the way we see the natural world or each other, or even a particular situation in our life? So for me, one of my definitions of creativity is when we lovingly stand on the edge of the unknown and are willing to move into it. Whether it's writing a song or trying to understand the way somebody else thinks, or looking at big problems that we need to deal with. There are so many ways in which we can perceive the ordinary or the unnoticed. And given a slight turn, we start to see it with new eyes. So I just want to speak for a moment of my experience as an artist in the natural world, because I have this really kind of awesome experience over and over again when I go out into the woods or down in the ocean and I just hang out. And I look and I draw, and I sometimes take photographs, and sometimes I do plein air painting, or sometimes I record sounds, but I let it nourish me and I let it speak to me. And so often I feel, this amazing grace of actually being able to be there, but also that a conversation, an inner conversation starts. And it has to do with me being able to listen to the particular and to the details. And then it's out of that noticing, in the story, there's what Propheta noticed inside Samuel's heart. She noticed the things that she'd never noticed before. So what is it that allows us to gain new perspective, or in a sense, put on new glasses, or, take 2 steps sideways and be able to see something from a different angle? It certainly takes a willingness to be open and to put aside preconceived notions, and just be present with something until it presents itself, until it shows up. So I sometimes feel that I've noticed during this time of COVID, certainly in British Columbia, but I suspect all over Canada, that when the weather is suitable, it's like one of the gifts is to just go outside, that we're nourished by it, we're blessed by it. And we start to see how we need that connection. So, I think this kind of creativity, this openness, this being willing to listen, however we represent that, but more importantly, how we experience that, how we make space for it, is part of what your story is talking about. But I think it's something for each one of us to discover and play with, and especially in the natural world. I've been noticing recently how many artists throughout the ages, whether it's modern or, the Impressionists or a long time ago, really are so inspired by the natural world. And it's not just because of what they paint, it's because of what they feel when they're in that space. So I guess the last thing I want to say is the difference between head knowledge, information, and between heart knowledge. And I think that's what you're talking about in terms of Easterism is that when we can go from what we know as information or as dialectic or problem to solve in our minds into something that is more deeply felt and is both felt and known in both of those places. So love of each other, love of the world seems like a spiritual practice to me. And it's a spiritual practice that has, incredible rewards. And yet we need to experience it and practice it. And then we do the sort of the surprise, the delight, the grace of it comes in. And yeah, I completely agree that we need to be able to listen, to be able to love, whether it's the natural world, whether it's other people who we don't necessarily agree with. And I think that creativity, being open and listening and practicing those muscles of seeing the particular, seeing the details it's a practice and it's a way to move forward. So I guess that's just what I'd like to offer in relation to this story this evening and our meditation for Earth Day.
Thank you, Nan. Thank you. Creativity as a practice, I very much agree. Practice is a beautiful, maybe if you were forced as a child to do scales on a piano or on a violin, maybe practice was onerous. But the more I go along, the more practice is a beautiful, it's a beautiful way to get in touch with the world. And as you say, detail. So it's not just it's a kind, compassionate, very intimate connection. You talked about listening. Maybe should we go to the song so people can see your art a little bit and hear the song?
Yeah, there's just one other thing I wanted to say. I'm remembering the sort of discovery that one expression of love is paying attention. When any one of us experiences being paid attention to, we can often experience it, especially if it's loving attention. But whenever we pay attention, loving attention to the natural world or each other, I think that's love.
Absolutely. Yeah, when Martin Buber talks about this I-thou relationship, rather than the I-it relationship, the I-it is I objectify you. The I-thou is I see you as a person, another who demands my respect and having your own dignity. We see that we can, as he says, we can do that with a tree. We can, rather than commodify it, we can see it as a fellow creature, modeled and loved by God into being. So, yeah, all very wonderful. And to be present, what else are we called to do? What else did Jesus do? I once saw the biographer of the Dalai Lama, and somebody asked him in the audience, how do you know the Dalai Lama is holy? And he said, because he knew the Dalai Lama personally, he said, no matter who he's talking to, he is completely, utterly present to that person. He's not worried about what's coming next. He's not looking at his watch. He's not, heaven forbid, talking on his cell phone. He is completely and utterly captivated by the person in front of him. And according to the biographer, this was the telltale sign that this man was a holy man. And I imagine Jesus as being exactly the same, just completely and utterly connected to whoever he was talking to. Even if he didn't agree with him, because he didn't agree with many people, but he was completely there for them. So we're gonna, you'll have to pardon me. Nan mentioned writing songs. I've been kind of on a songwriting tear these days. I'm not a great musician. I'm not a great singer, but I love writing songs. And it's part of this creativity that I feel kind of bubbling up in me. And it's basically my odes and my psalms to the natural world. So I'm going to share with you a song I wrote about some beloved streams and rivers. And you'll see some of Nan's artwork. I just better make sure I have got the sound right. So you'll see some of Nan's watercolors. Do you want to say anything about that, Nan, about your watercolors?
Well, I've been doing these really large watercolors. Some of them are 5 feet by 3 feet. Those are the biggest ones. Anyways, it's hard to get a sense of scale on the computer, but they're all connected to this ongoing meditation in the natural world, really around where I live.
Thank you. And so what you'll see, the photographs are thanks to Matthew Hensel, Jesuit in Guelph, here with me. And so the first creek is the Marden Creek, and the second is the Speed River. And these are all within a 10-minute walk of my home, which I feel very blessed to have these friends around me. So again, pardon the play-in, pardon the singing, but it's my tribute to these beautiful waters.
You are water walking. You don't talk to earth. It's earth in you who's talking. Open up your mind now. Let the wind blow in some seed. Then the gracious rainfall will grow the way you think. Write a song about your river. Write a poem about your stream. Send your lake a love letter. Tell the ocean your deepest dreams. Tell the ocean your deepest dreams. Your body is a temple. Your body is a tree. Your body is a fountain, as fluid as the sea. All the world flows through you. You are that constant flow. Everything keeps changing. All we think we know. Write a song about your river. Write a poem about your stream. Send your lake a love letter. Tell the ocean your deepest dreams. Tell the ocean your deepest dreams. When you kiss wild waters and taste the salt of home, know yourself the daughter, know yourself the son, related to each droplet, a universal blood, born of first creation that makes creation good. Write a poem about your river. Write a song about your stream. Send your lake a love letter. Tell the ocean your deepest dreams. Tell the ocean your deepest dreams. You are the ocean's deepest dream.
So there you have it, folks. We thank you very, very much for being with us. We have some time for some questions, I think. Unless, Nan, do you have anything you'd like to say at the end here?
No, I'm interested in what people's responses are and what their questions are.
Thank you very much. Jose's going to open me. Great, thank you. Well, the first question is a very simple one for you, Greg. Will Scary Sky be published along with your other books, and will it be available for educators?
We'd love that to be the case. We'll see. I've put it by one publisher, and they said they don't do that kind of stuff. But I don't know. Maybe if anyone knows a publisher that might like a Scary Sky story, please get in touch with us. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it out. I mean, I've always wanted to be a writer, and I mean, to see your words in someone's hands and on someone's eyeballs there's nothing quite like it. So hopefully.
How do we avoid the temptations of shortcuts to happiness, such as the rainbow spray, and do the hard work of trying to see the long-term solutions needed to achieve ecological, physical, and human emotion balance?
Do you want to have a crack at that, Nan?
Yeah, I love the word shortcut in this case, because often we want to find these quick solutions. And sometimes I think we really don't get God's time. And it's different time, especially if we're scared. We want things to hurry up. So I really do think that paying attention to the details, whether it's within your own being, like when you're feeling stressed or when you can feel open. I've also noticed in myself that when I'm able to actively do something, not run around like crazy, but really find a positive and engaged energy, but in the right way. Each one, according to their own being. It was interesting. I was talking about certain things with Peter, my husband, recently, and there was one kind of type of activism that he was trying to do, but he realized it made him way too nervous, and it wasn't the right thing for him. But there's other amazing kinds of things that he's done, and I noticed that it can move from a sense of despair to a sense of engagement, and that once one takes that step, but quietly with listening, then the next step becomes obvious, I think. Anyways, what are your thoughts about that?
Thank you. Beautiful. Well, partly, I mean, simplicity is a gift. It's a gift to be simple. It's a gift to be true. Is that how it goes?
To be free.
To be free, even better. So I think when Jesus counsels us about poverty and simplicity, I think there's something deeply spiritual about that and necessary. So, because it brings us happiness if we're, again, as Nan said, if we're fearful, and if we have, this is the whole Buddhist take that if you're attached to things, you become fearful because you're going to lose them. So you could say, well, I'm going to try to cut down my desires, or you could say, I'll take things as gift and try to live simply, so others can simply live, as Gandhi said, and always have faith that I fit in a bigger picture. Now, there's something called discernment, and this is what Ignatius pressed throughout his life and tried to teach us to do. Often it's between two goods. So as Nan said, I may not be called to do a certain kind of thing, a certain kind of activism, but I am called to do something. So how do I find that and find the greatest good for me, and for how can I use who I am and my gifts to the greatest good for others, and not just protect them for myself. So, and then really you did put your finger on it when you talked about fear. Fear is such a paralyzing emotion. And the more I kind of go along in the spiritual life, the more I'm convinced of this line in the Bible that our spiritual quest is simply to be not afraid. And in the face of climate change, in the face of so much, we have to not be afraid, because the temptation is just to say we are in a terrible bind, which we are, but how do we carry on and not be afraid? Because fear raises our defenses. It makes us angry. It makes us violent. So those are short-term. They may be necessary on the short term, but they'll kill us on the long term. And we have to be here for the long term.
Greg, I just wanted to say something about that. You talked about gratitude. And I think that, it sounds simplistic to say perhaps, but I think that viewing the world as a gift and viewing things with gratitude and actually practicing gratitude, it is like putting new glasses on. It is like putting new perspective on. Mm-hmm. And it is something that shifts a person over time. So yeah, that piece. And it's not that we can be grateful for everything all the time, but it sure adds balance and perspective.
Yeah. And I guess that's where I was a bit afraid when I talked about some of the angry discourse in ecological circles, that we blaming the previous generations for the mess they made. Well, yes, but they also have given us life and have given us many, many things, the art that we appreciate, the technology we appreciate. So it seems fundamentally wrong to be ungrateful for the things that we should be grateful for. And I think it makes us very unhappy when we're ingrates. Ingrates are kind of by definition happy. So how do we be grateful? Yeah, very, very good. And again, it's a practice, as you say. It doesn't come easy sometimes.
Political systems can manipulate the goals of climate change to the betterment or to the detriment of the existing natural world. I like to think that political systems depend on the perceptions, inclinations, and actions of each human on the planet. Your thoughts?
Shall I have a crack at it and then give it to you?
Go for it. I have some thoughts about it too. But...
well, exactly. Again, it's the whole notion of the forest and the trees. So, collectively, we are more than we are individually, and yet the collective is only the individuals. So you could say, if me just doing one little thing is not really going to change the sway of history or the political system. And yet I feel that we have to be true to ourselves, and no matter what. And so even if no one else is going to follow me, I have to vote the way I feel, and I have to live the way I feel is right. And that's kind of giving priority to what each one's conscience, which according to the Catholic Church anyway is the highest arbiter in life, that you always have to listen to your conscience, even if it goes against authority. So yeah, how do we live in such a way that we can influence others in a positive way, knowing that we live in imperfect systems? So and knowing that, always being careful not to try to justify the means by the end, because that can be very dangerous. It seems that we can start to do all kinds of things in the name of an end we think is worthy, but without maintaining dignity and integrity of people and creation, we can get ourselves into, again, other kinds of tragedies. So probably an unsatisfactory answer, but it's all I got right now. Nan, can you improve on that, please?
Well, I don't know if I can improve on it or not, but I definitely feel like what I'm hoping for in the world at this point and within me individually is shift in consciousness, shift in awareness. And, it's whatever ideas we have in our minds about the way the world works, that's what all our actions come from. And so when we shift our perspective from looking at something, as I was saying, looking at a tree as either lumber or as a living being, that's a shift in consciousness. So it's kind of an abstract thing to say, but I think it's a very concrete that when we start living with a different perspective, that also will infect political systems. And nothing ever stays the same. and as far as our ideas about things. So yeah, it's definitely this shift. And I see things happening with the millennials as well. So can we influence things? It's almost like moving a super tanker in the middle of the ocean.
Or the Suez Canal.
Yeah, well, that doesn't seem like there's a lot of room for movement there. Yeah.
In 1986, the Passionate Fathers in Port Burwell, Ontario, started giving retreats in environmental theology, the new field of environmental theology. And the same year, Father Steve Dunn started teaching a course in environmental theology at St. Michael's College Faculty of Theology. And he was generally laughed at and even mocked for this new kind of hippie field of environmental theology. Could you speak to how the theology has developed and changed over the last years since that time? And do the Jesuits have a specific charism or commitment to the environment and creation?
Absolutely. I'll start with that latter part of the question first. Last year, the Jesuits all around the world came out with what we call the UAPs, the Universal Apostolic Preferences. So these are orientations, you could say, that are supposed to guide all our works. And so they're walking with the poor, accompanying youth, promoting the spiritual exercises, and caring for our common home, caring for creation. So the Jesuits, at least in theory, really, this is supposed to inform everything that we do. So again, we're sometimes fledglings in this, so we're still trying to get our wings sometimes, but definitely this is who we are. And that, again, that's not new. I mean, Ignatius himself thought that God was present in all things. He had a very world-affirming theology. It wasn't a world denying, saying that this place is a vale of tears. He said God is present in all of this. So obviously it deserves our respect and our collaboration, you could say, to keep it as holy as God intended it. I mean, even in Genesis, God made things and saw it was good. So we have to preserve and promote that goodness. And I was going to say something about, that was the second question. What was the first question?
The development of theology over.
Of course. So around this time, in May 24th, 2015, Pope Francis signed his encyclical on Pentecost, Laudato Si. And that was, you could say, a turn of the tide in terms of ecological theology. So encyclicals are the highest document, the most authoritative document a pope can write. And so it becomes Catholic teaching. And if you have not read this, it's the most beautiful thing you'll want to read. I consider it the most important document to come out of Rome since Vatican II. And it is all about our connection with ecology and our need for spiritual ecological conversion. So that has changed everything, and it's made it's legitimized what Father Dunn was doing so long ago. And so he was a prophet, he was a forerunner, and he did some of the hard work and caught, what often prophets do, they catch flack. But now it's part of Catholic social teaching, Catholic doctrine. So which is wonderful. If I can encourage you to read anything, read Laudato Si. It's such a beautiful and necessary document.
Could you elaborate a little more on the connection between creativity and conversion?
Do you want to say anything about that, Dan? What you see, I'll say something after you.
Yeah, I just want to say that creativity it's a living experience, and it can be applied to any area of life. Anytime you're standing on the edge of the unknown and kind of lovingly moving into it, you don't necessarily know what the outcome is going to be. That's a creative place. It's also, I think, a place of conversion because you don't know what you're going to discover. You don't know what new thing will engage you. And very often that moment of discovery is something that impacts you more than other things. It doesn't go by unnoticed. It's something that you remember. And I think conversion is something that you remember as well. It's something that's a touchstone. And so whenever we can experience the creative place, whether it's in relation to others or the natural world, you know, it's like being an explorer or an adventurer. And surprising things can happen. I think oftentimes people hesitate because they don't see themselves as creative. And they sort of leave that to people who are officially creative. But I think that everybody has that place where they need to be a little bit courageous and move into the unknown. And that's a particularly exciting journey when it comes to, in a sense, this faith journey, testing things out, trying it out, and seeing what happens and remembering. Yeah. What do you want to say about that?
Well, just thinking about even imagination. So those people who say they have no creativity, everyone I've met knows how to daydream, and that's being creative. That's looking at what's not there and seeing possibilities. You think of like the classic conversion story of St. Paul. And again, this goes what you were talking about, Nan. I mean, he was able to see something completely different. So what he looked at before, Christians, traitors, blasphemers, enemies of God. And then all of a sudden, this conversion allows him to see a whole new world. And look what the creativity that came out of that. I mean, his writings have shaped the church shaped Christianity since he wrote them. So creativity and conversion, again, who knows what comes first, but they work together. And so the more we're converted, the more open our eyes are. The more open our eyes are, the more we're able to continue that conversion, because conversion just doesn't happen once and we say, okay, that's good, been there, done that. It's as you kind of were hinting at, Nan, it's a practice, and we have to constantly be open to ever newer experiences. And as soon as our mind starts to close and to think that we got it all made, that's when the doors close and we get trapped in our preconceptions and our thoughts, and the creativity dries up and somebody else does it for us.
Yeah, the other thing I want to say is that so often when people move into something that is self-expression, you know, could be, well, honestly, anything. But self-expression, it kind of wakes up our heart in a way. And I think that conversion and our hearts have a lot to do with each other. So even if it's self-expression of something that is difficult, or in a way it's naming things by expressing them. And that helps us to be wholly there.
Yeah. And I mean, that's why I love the Psalms so much, because they talk about hard things and in this creative way. And I mean, it's in that act of being, even lamenting is an act of faith. You wouldn't bother lamenting, if you wouldn't bother writing a lament or writing a psalm that says, you know, God, you've abandoned me, unless you actually believed in God, unless you actually believed there could be a change in that. So it's a very hopeful, any kind of creativity, even if it is singing the blues, is a very hopeful, life-affirming thing. It doesn't have to be pretty all the time. It has to be truthful.
No. Yeah.
Could you please give us your thoughts about eating meat? I think this will be an issue, a very important issue in this century. Does this relate to the care of the planet?
Absolutely. Go for it, Greg.
When I was 16 years old, I asked my parents if I could be vegetarian. And they said no, because they both worked and they come home late and didn't want to make 2 dinners. So I figured that's fair enough. So the day I moved out at 18, I became vegetarian. So it's been several decades now. my parents have subsequently become vegan. So they're not for my proselytizing, but just, so absolutely. I mean, the way we're treating animals, future generations are going to look back at us and say, how could they ever have thought that this was correct to treat animals the way we're doing in industrial farms? It's going to be a blotch on our history. So, and it's in terms of climate, in terms of carbon emissions, in terms of desertification and land use, all the scientific research shows that cutting back on meat is one of the most significant things we can do. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily become a vegetarian overnight, or even, but cut back. We certainly don't need the amount of meat that we eat. Most Canadians get too much protein rather than not enough. So all I can say is, yeah, it'll make you feel better. It's probably tastier, and well, I've been living at it for almost close to 30 years now, and I feel great.
We've just been reading a book called We Are the Weather. I'm not sure the name of the author, but it's a pretty impassioned book just about this topic. And so it explores the different ways that factory production of any animal products, how that affects climate change. The author, who I think is a vegetarian but struggles not to eat meat, and he's clear about that, he makes the suggestion that one eat meat or some animal product only once a day. So everyone comes to their own place with it. But yeah, we've seen lots of change in our life. The biggest change for me was actually when I went and lived in Japan for a year. And the way they eat is so different than the West. And the amount of meat and that kind of thing that they use is very small compared to the West.
You seem to learn from Buddhism quite a lot as you quoted it. How do you reconcile the concept of God in Christianism and no God in Buddhism?
Great question. In my own experience, they're complementary. I think they need each other, and they work so well together. Now, of course, not everyone has my experience, but I mean, that's my experience, and I thank God for it. Now, Buddhism in its purest form is not a theistic, it's not a religion, it's a philosophy. And so especially in its Zen form, there's absolutely no contradiction, there's no competition between the two. In fact, there's a Jesuit, his name is Bob Kennedy, I believe, another Kennedy in the States. He's a Zen Roshi. He's a Jesuit priest and a Zen Roshi, and that's absolutely fine. Now, some of the other, like the Tibetan Buddhism and some of the other Buddhisms are theistic. They consider the Buddha a god. So, but even there, again, it's what the Buddha was concerned about was human suffering, and he said, "I've discovered a way out of human suffering, and that is basically to look at yourself and to be compassionate." And to not to be greedy, basically. I mean, if you wanted to get very simple, not to be greedy, because it's our greed that makes us so miserable, because we're always clutching and craving things and trying to avoid displeasure, craving pleasure and avoiding displeasure. And if we can somehow get to the root of that, we'll make not only ourselves very much happier, but we'll make most of the rest of the planet happier. The Buddhists are, if all the Buddhists follow their understanding and their philosophy, the world would be such a wonderful place, because it's a very compassionate. I mean, they have compassion for all creatures, and this is at the heart of Buddhism: compassion for every living thing. So, so in ways, we have a lot to learn from Buddhism in terms of treating other creatures, and not because everything they feel as sentience. So I would say, if you want, I mean, read some Thich Nhat Hanh. In fact, I'm a Catholic priest because of Thich Nhat Hanh. I was in Buddhism, and I never repudiated my faith, but I was kind of lost interest in my Catholic roots. And reading Thich Nhat Hanh, his Living Buddha, Living Christ, there's a passage, he says, all these disenfranchised Catholics came to my Plum Village monastery in France saying, I want to become a good Buddhist. And he would say, you're not going to be a good Buddhist if you're not a good Catholic. Go learn your roots. And I took that to heart, and I thank Thich Nhat Hanh. So I'm where I am thanks to him and thanks to Buddhism. So I find it, I feel very blessed to have kind of come across it and it have influenced me.
I'd just like to say as well that I've found that everything that I've read the same book as you, and really appreciate Thich Nhat Hanh and Pema Chodron and a few others as well. But I also find that mindfulness practice really helpful for anyone to be able to create a little bit of distance between reaction and what's going on inside. So this piece around attachment that comes through Buddhism is helpful. Anyways, other things could be said, but I'm sure there's other questions too.
There are lots more questions, but we only have time for one more. Social media has commodified hate, anger, and divisiveness. We need it today to affect change, but putting that genie back in the bottle seems impossible. Any ideas of vehicles to combat that toxicity with love?
Mm. Wow, yeah. Yeah, I think that's where the restraint I was kind of talking at. Obviously, we couldn't have done this whole thing without this amazing social media. The fact that Nan can come in, we could be talking, have all these people from who knows where come together. So it's wonderful, but if there's not a bit of restraint, and you can say discipline even, it's going to be a rainbow, it's going to be a scary sky. And we see that all over the place. Again, the hate, the vitriol. Again, this it's up to each one. How much are you going to enter into it? We could even look at the Buddhism. I mean, they talk about right action, right thought, right speech. And if you don't have those, if you're talking bad about people, if you're thinking bad about people, if you're writing bad about people, you're doing a lot of harm, even if you've never met these people. So how do we be compassionate? How do we be loving? And unfortunately, the medium is the message, as is said. So sometimes the distance allows us to do things that we wouldn't do if we were face to face with a person. So I don't own a cell phone myself, and I try to avoid such things. But I have to say, I've been converted to the Zoom. I resisted tooth and nail up until I saw that retreats. I started with retreats here at Loyola House, and it really helped people. And then I got onto some of these webinars, and wow, this is really quite wonderful. So I'm a bit of a convert myself, but I do keep it at arm's length because I know how insidious it can get into us and kind of wreak havoc. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because I don't engage a whole lot in social media either. And yet I see many wonderful things and a lot of creativity expressed in this way. But I do feel like if we treated social media in the way we treated other people, we might, if we really imagined that there were other people on the other end and we weighed what we engaged in, it would probably really help. I also feel like it's a very, very new medium. In a certain sense, we're just figuring out how it all works. 100 years from now, if we're still doing this, we might have some kind of disciplines around it. It might be less of a free-for-all. There might be more etiquette around it. Anyways, yeah. And also just watch and see what it's doing inside you. Imagine what it's doing to others as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe have that rainbow, consider that rainbow. So slide into the heart of the person you're writing to or speaking to or making a video about and see how that person would react. And remember, that's, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That's not golden for, that's golden for a good reason. So
I was also thinking for me, probably lots of people did this, but at a certain point when the craziness south of the border was going on with the election, I just didn't tune in anymore. I couldn't bear it, and I didn't want to experience that. So, yeah.
I want to thank both of you very much for your attentiveness to the questions. We could be here for another hour. Some of the questions have asked for the words to your song, and another question asked for the name of the Jesuit program you referred to. Someone else asked for the words to the quotation from Ignatius. So we can put them up in our chat when you come back in 2 weeks. It's my pleasure to thank both of you. The comments have just been so positive that we've been receiving this evening. More than one person has compared you, Greg, to Leonard Cohen. So you have a career ahead of you. Many comments on the beautiful art and the illustrations and where they can get the story. I think it's been a magnificent preparation for Earth Day, and made us all more attentive to this special day when we're called to just pause and think about creation. And your presentation touched all of our senses, visual, song, poetry, art, story. So on behalf of all of the people who joined us tonight, and on behalf of the Jesuits of Canada, I want to thank you for your expertise and your spirituality and for sharing it with us tonight. And I also want to thank Jose and Fanny and Albert and Michelle for their help in getting all of the little technical things put together for us. So thank you all very much. A reminder that in 48 hours, this will be on the Jesuit website, a recording, and we hope to see you all back here in 2 weeks when Greg will be with us again. I'm going to turn it over to Jose.
Yeah, just a quick reminder about the recording. I will be sending it via email too within the next 24 to 48 hours. And remember to please fill out a brief survey after the session. It will pop on your screen and it will take 2 minutes to fill out, or less than 2 minutes. They really help us optimize future sessions. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks.
You will.
Good evening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Blessings to you.